We start. Welcome to the quarterly Eastern chapter of the World War One Historical Association, with Mark Binbo as the chapter president. And just for your information, you may see me disappear. I'm in a tornado watch area right now, and I'm going to mute myself so you don't hear the alerts. But if you suddenly don't see me, it's because I'm going to gather up all the dogs and the parents to go to the storm shelter.
In that order.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
And anyway, with that, we are also recording the meeting just so you're aware. And if you have any questions for Stefan as it's rolling through, please go ahead and do that in the meeting chat, which may help you remember your question until later. And again, welcome. And I'm going to turn it over to Mark.
All right. Thank you all. Um, I'm expecting some others to start popping in as we go because we told them we might be starting a bit late. But for our speaker this meeting, I asked a colleague of mine who I've known for some years after meeting and presenting together at a conference on World War One. Dr. Stefan Manz is professor of global history at Aston University in Birmingham in the UK. He's a fellow of the Royal Historical Society and a research associate at the University of Pretoria in South Africa. And his interests, what he's been working on for a long time, is uh, things that internment and other issues with foreign nationals during World War One. You know, what happens when you're living in what is now your home country's enemy. He and I wrote an article together that was published several years ago on the spy scare and anti-German panic in Washington, D.C. And he has written several books, including, see if you can actually see there, that. It's weird with the cameras. Hold on. Okay. Well, I had the book here. Apparently, you can't even see it. It's called Enemies in the Empire, Civilian Internment in the British Empire during the First World War, which is interesting book. I've been enjoying reading it. I got it, my wife got it for me for Christmas. I'd been asking for it, and she got it for me, so I am enjoying it. And he's going to be talking about other examples of this. Stefan, do you want me to bring up your PowerPoint?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Oops. Screen sharing, and let's see. All right. There, can you all see the PowerPoint okay? Stefan, can you see your PowerPoint?
Yeah, that's fine. Do you want
Okay.
me to give you to ask you when you need to go to the next slide or I
Yeah,
can't.
that's
Yeah.
that sounds fine.
Okay, good. Okay. Shall I start, Mark, or
Go ahead, please.
yeah, okay. So thanks very much for the introduction, and thanks to Mark for inviting me. It's a pleasure to talk to the association, which I hadn't been aware of before, but it sounds pretty fantastic, the activities you're doing and the seminar series and the presentation. So, as Mark said, I'll be reporting on the book I had published in 2020. If you could go to the next slide, please. Um, the, uh, And the book is, as Mark said, entitled Enemies in the Empire, Civilian Internment in the British Empire During the First World War. What I'll do in the presentation is not just give an overview of the main findings of the book, but in the second part of the presentation, I'll also talk a little bit about public engagement activities. Um, Based on those findings, so it's not just going to be, as I said, the results of research, but also how can you actually communicate that research to broader audiences. So first, a bit of an overview of the book. So the Mark, I can't see the top line of each of the slides. Oh, hang on. Need to, yeah, okay, it's fine. Yeah, I needed to click something
Okay.
away. Um, okay, so a brief summary, all based on original sources. It's a history of civilian internment concerning around 50,000 civilians. The important point is civilians here. I'm not dealing with military prisoners of war. That has been described before, so the new angle into this is really how did civilians during the First World War fare? In terms of numbers, we're talking about roughly 50,000 enemy aliens. That was the official labels of those stranded in the British Empire with a mostly German passport. Around 90% of those Germans, others were Austro-Hungarians, Ottomans, and Bulgarians. The Axis powers. So 30,000 of those enemy aliens were interned in Britain, and that is the news story. That is the 20,000 who were interned across the empire. Um, we found 87 main camps dotted across the empire and a multitude of smaller camps. The biggest camp located on the Isle of Man called Nokelo with just over 20,000. When I say we, I wrote the book together with my colleague Panikos Panay from the Montfort University in Leicester. This was a bit of a job sharing because it is a global issue and the amount of sources was just astounding and spread across several countries and actually continents. So we did some, as I said, job sharing in terms of geographies and traveling there, and then brought our sources together and conceptualized this book. So the these basic facts fit into broader research frameworks and paradigms. The first one is that of a greater war, so not just the Great War, but the greater war, both in terms of geographies and chronology. So not just 14 to 18, but actually starting with the Balkan Wars and then going up to the Treaty of Lausanne and the kind of post-war conflagrations. And in terms of geographies, not just nation states at war, but actually empires at war. It's that Robert Gerber, Manela conceptualization of that greater war. We are then moving away from national frameworks and moving towards imperial frameworks. National frameworks in terms of the internment of enemy aliens have been done in the past. Various researchers have written really good scholarly work on this. Bodo and Cordan on Canada, for example, internment of enemy aliens in Canada. Gerald Fisher on Australia, Andrew Francis on New Zealand, then Panikos Panay has written something on Britain before. I had done a microhistorical studies of enemy aliens in Glasgow and Scotland before and during the First World War. But what the new angle of the book is really to combine all those studies and feed more original sources into that and make that into an imperial rather than a national study. The other new paradigm is really that of civilians at war, moving away just from the kind of Western front lines and military conflagration, and really looking at civilians. I'm just referring to the work of Tammy Proctor, who's written the definitive study on that topic. And as soon as we draw in to our analysis more and more civilians, we're moving towards more towards the notion of totalization of war and total warfare, picking up on studies by Daniel Seges, who's written on Australia, and others who've written on that totalization of warfare. Then the next, could I just ask a question, Mark? When I move my mouse, can you see this on the screen?
No.
You can't. Okay, so I'll refer to the actual slide then. So the next one is Aidan Forth, who's written a really good book on what he calls barbed wire imperialism, internment camps, or the idea of confining particular um, groups of people. Within the British Empire, he mainly talks about he starts off with the idea of the workhouse, which sort of implants the idea of confining a particular group, and then talks about South Africa and India and the internment of paupers and criminals and all kinds of groups of people. And it is within that longer history of internment that our book is actually positioned. And the last point here is that of forgotten victims, memorialization. How do we want to remember this? And this is what I'll actually talk about in the second part of the presentation. Our main arguments briefly. Britain stood at the forefront of the first global mass internment operations of the 20th century, developing techniques and mechanisms from the Anglo-Boer War just 15 years earlier. Uh, and our second main argument is really that conditions in camps were relatively humane. These are not to be compared with any kinds of extermination camps in the Second World War, nothing compared to the Holocaust. Our concern is with analyzing these broader trajectories of mass internment in the 20th century. We're giving various reasons, obviously the Hague Conventions and those ideas around humanity in warfare that had just been passed before the First World War. Then, in the British case, is very specifically the lessons learned from the South African War, as we call it in the book, public relations disaster of the Boer War, which was globally obviously criticized, and the images coming out of the Boer War. So the lesson learned really, if we have to intern civilians, let's treat them relatively well in order to avoid that happening again. And then the reciprocity issues, that the third point here, fear of reprisals against British in German captivity. So there was this constant diplomatic back and forth between the British and the German Foreign Office. If you treat our prisoners badly, we'll treat yours badly as well. So those three reasons mainly for relatively good treatment in the camps. Could you move to the next one, please? Okay, so what we've then drawn up, this is the first global map that anyone's tried to construct with internment camps in the empire. So you can really see the whole arch from starting in the west, from the kind of Canadian west and down to New Zealand, the whole empire pretty much dotted with camps. Um, Looking at this map, can briefly talk about some typologies of camps. So there were different kinds of camps. If we start in the southeast here, two prison islands in New Zealand. So that's one type prison island, very small islands, just converted, so to speak, for the purpose of keeping those enemy aliens. Then we've got converted former garrison forts. British troops being moved to the European front lines, those garrisons then sort of emptied and then repurposed for keeping enemy aliens. Fort Napier in South Africa was the main camp in Africa, and that is one of those converted garrison forts. Then we've got purpose-built camps, and Nokelo on the Isle of Man was purpose-built pretty much from scratch. And then we've got converted civilian structures, such as factory buildings. Those were quite popular. Amherst in Canada, for example, was one of those, a former iron foundry, then just barbed wire around it, and then fitted for keeping enemy aliens. And Handforth in Cheshire and Britain was one of those as well. So we've got a number of different camps. Prison Island, sorry, I forgot, maybe Bermuda. There was a very small island in the Bermuda archipelago, which was converted as well as a prison island. Okay, next slide, please. Along with internment came mass deportation. So the kind of concentration in certain areas, and what we found here in the sources, again, we drew up this map, digging in the sources. The main transportation routes globally were from Africa, so from West Africa, enemy aliens being transported to mainland Britain, mostly ending up in Nokelo. Then from German East Africa, the former colony, today's Tanzania, from German East Africa being transported to Egypt, and very often from Egypt then to Great Britain, and another group of enemy aliens being transported to India, to the main camp Akmenagar in India. Then, if you look at the southern tip of Africa, this is where German Southwest Africa was, and after British troops overran Luderitzbucht in September 1914, many of those Germans were then deported to South Africa, but the main population in the South African camp Fort Napier in Pietermaritzburg were those who had settled in the Union of South Africa, so immigrants who were then taken to Fort Napier. In the Atlantic, if you look at those arrows there, so these were mostly civilians taken off ships and then apprehended either in the Caribbean or taken to Canada. Then if you look at Southeast Asia, most enemy aliens who had settled in the broader Southeast Asian and the South Pacific area, taken to Australia and then concentrated, so to speak, in the main Australian camps. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, I'll now talk a little bit about enemy aliens within Britain, before then moving on to imperial locations. So in terms of numbers, by the outbreak of the First World War, around 100,000 German speakers, so very lively immigrant communities in Britain, mainly urban communities with ethnic neighborhoods, ethnic food and ethnic culture, and everything you know from the States as well in terms of the German immigrant population. Right after the outbreak of war, after the British declaration of war on the 4th of August, and a day later, legislation came in straight away, the Aliens Restriction Act, which stipulated resettlement of enemy aliens away from the East Coast, which was a restricted area. Repatriation, so a lot of them being sent back to Germany. Expropriation, so taken away property, and the most drastic measure, internment in those camps. Along with this came very strong anti-German riots. On the left-hand side, the image there, the photograph from London, and Hope you can read this on the screen. Clear out the German, say the people. So the yellow press really having a field day in, or having a day in stirring up um, those emotions. And this one is after the sinking of the Lusitania, so the May riots, the Lusitania riots, which played out in the across the empire actually. On the right-hand side, you see an image of the Nokelo camp. So a huge structure, various compounds that grew in the course of the war. And at the bottom, you can read Zivilgefangenenlager that reads Civilian Prisoner Camp, Nokelo, IOM is Isle of Man. Next one, please. Okay, thank you. So here's an image from inside the hut. The hut's around 30 to 50 uh, enemy aliens in one hut. You can see it's only males, so I should have mentioned it's only men who were interned, women in exceptional circumstances, but usually only men. You can see the cramped conditions, the kind of laundry, washing hanging down from the ceiling. And if you look closely, the faces and the way the men look here, it confirms what I said earlier. Relatively good treatment, well fed. So these are not undernourished faces. They've got furniture and mattresses, and so everything you need for living, but obviously not a very happy living, very cramped conditions. And those men would then be away for 4 or 5 years from their families and jobs and everything else. Um, mm, Next one, please. Okay, so much for Britain. I'll now move into the empire, so to speak. Give you a bit of an overview there. The Lusitania riots, as I mentioned, played out throughout the empire and the waves as well. So really, May, June, July 1915, that was the biggest wave, not just in Britain, but also in the empire in terms of the numbers swelling in the internment camps. Example, Australia, we've got just under 7,000 internees there. 4,500 of those had settled in Australia before, and the remainder were those deported from other Southeast Asian and South Pacific locations. The largest camp in the empire was Holsworthy in New South Wales. That's the one you see on the picture there, with around 5,000 internees. So the biggest one in mainland or in Britain was Nokelo, and the second biggest was Holsworthy. The third biggest was Fort Napier in South Africa. Um, so in Australia, then 1918, 19, mostly 19, 6,000 were repatriated, i.e., sent back to Germany, and that included then wives and children. Um, if you read the caption at the top of the image, it says German concentration camp, Liverpool, Australia, 1914 to 18. Um, I've done this in presentations before, and it's quite a surprise for listeners to read German concentration camp because you associate different things with a German concentration camp. And this is sort of sums up what we're trying to do with that research as well, to tell that wider story, and that it's a little bit more complex than merely concentrating on the Holocaust, which was obviously the most brutal incarnation of that policy, but there is a prehistory and there is a history afterwards as well. Next one, please. Okay, when I said the treatment was relatively good, there was obviously suffering in the camps. There was no conscious mistreatment, but just being away from family and your job and your life slipping away, so to speak, caused major problems, and those were defined even at the time as the so-called barbed wire disease. That's a term which was coined by a Swiss psychiatrist who was also a camp inspector for the Swiss Foreign Office, who did the American Foreign Office and the Swiss Foreign Office did a lot of camp inspections, and he went into the camps and then noticed and analyzed that particular mental state, barbed wire disease, which is a combination of boredom and depression, always having to be together with the same people day out, day in, day out. So it's a very, very particular kind of depression, which comes through in many of the sources we found. Here's just one example from a sea captain who was detained or taken off his ship in the Atlantic and then interned in Jamaica for several years. Uh, Quote, do you have any idea? He's writing to his wife, quote, do you have any idea, my darling, what it means to be devoid of any occupation and exercise for over 3 years? This is a perfect means of making a person ready for the lunatic asylum. And who knows how things will end up with me if I will not be able to concentrate on other things soon, unquote. Um, so quite a few suicidal thoughts coming through many of the sources, and suicides actually happening in the camps as well. Next one, please. So in order to avoid that barbed wire disease, there was a lot of cultural life in those camps, very often picking up on some of the ethnic activities that had taken place in those communities before the war. Just some examples here from various camps: football in the Handforth camp in Cheshire. Then on the left-hand side, Turnen, the gymnastics, the very specific form of German gymnastics. That's from a Canadian camp. And on the right-hand side, this is from Nokalo, from the camp there. I chose this one. There are just hundreds and hundreds of those printed programs for theater performances, concert performances, etc. I just picked this one because there's a name you might recognize if you go to number 11, Pilatus Company. Herren, that's Mr. Can you read the names there? Pilates, Wolf, Clem, and Wimmer. That's the Joseph Pilates who would later migrate to New York and then establish his fitness regime in New York. But he was actually a boxer and a gymnast and interned in Nokalo, and some of his major biography. Where is it? Um, Quite a good book, just being published a couple of years ago. Joseph Pilates, and an argument is here that he had so much time in the camp to actually concentrate on his muscles and his stretching and all the other things, and he sort of perfected and developed that technique in the camp. So camps not just as a space of suffering, but also as a creative space, because those men were together in those camps. They developed, as I said, theater, music, sports, and all kinds of things. So it's a bit of a revisiting camps in under those different auspices. Next one, please. These are other examples. This is from the Fort Napier camp in South Africa, photographs from a collection which is held in the local museum in Pietermaritzburg. You can see the drawing on the top right-hand side, which just doesn't just give an insight into one of the pastimes they pursued, but also an insight into the camp. Again, cramped conditions, gardening. There's somebody gardening. That was a very popular thing to do in the camp. Top left-hand side, a choral society. The bottom right-hand side, woodwork and furniture making was a popular one to do as well. And the bottom left one, you can read the caption there: Cabaret, Parola Heimat, so homeland, These people were longing for home. Fort Napier, April 1919. Um, this links in with the Greater War argument I mentioned earlier. April 1919, the war was over, but for many of those internees, repatriation actually dragged on until the end of 1919. So even after the war had finished, they were actually aware of this and were constantly complaining, why can't we be sent home? But they were still kept as a kind of bargaining chip in the peace negotiations after the war. You can also see these four men there dressed in ladies' dresses, so cross-dressing was a big thing because female roles in theater plays had to be performed by men. Next one, please. Okay, so I've just given you an insight in some of the camps and the structures and the global implications. I'll now talk a little bit about the ways I've tried to communicate that particular subject to broader audiences. You will have seen a lot of people in those photographs and activities, so the topic really lends itself to that communication. It's something I've noticed when I gave talks and have done all the activities I'll tell you about. People connect with these individuals. They can very much identify with those conditions in the camp and the activities and a lot of the other things. When we Oh, Mark, could you briefly go to the next one, please? Um, I'll do this first. Based on the original research, I applied for some funding from the Arts and Humanities Research Council in Britain. And this is a very British thing, which is, I think, more pronounced than in the States. We are very much encouraged not just to write our books, but also to come up with innovative ways of communicating the results of our research to broader audiences. That's called follow-on for impact funding, so making a societal impact with the research one is conducting. So I applied and successfully received that funding, which allowed me to do five things with all those with that research. So, starting on the left-hand side, establishing an internment research center. This is based in the Scottish Borders Archive in Hawick, which was the site of the biggest camp in Scotland, Storps, near Hawick. And the aim of that center is really making sources accessible. It's a library with books on internment, and the proximity to this site actually allows for researchers to go to the library, look at the sources, and then visit the actual archaeological site. Um, the second one, translations. So a lot of the sources that are held in the archive are actually in German and thus not understandable for local researchers who don't know that. So camp newspapers, letters, programs, but also translations into English. Then theater plays. We had three performances of a play that was performed in the camp. So we sort of recreated an evening, a theater evening. Then the fourth one, an exhibition, which I'll tell you about in a minute, which was shown in various countries, mostly post-imperial locations in Canada, Barbados, and South Africa. Those were the main ones. And then education packs for primary schools. So quite a mix of formats there. Could you go to the previous one, please, Mark? Okay, so the underlying principles of producing these things, which we did all within a team, a transnationally operating team, because those things needed to be adapted to different localities. So we wanted transnational commemoration, not national, but transnational, in keeping with the general methodology of the book. Um, On the left-hand side, it's the dedication in the exhibition dedicated to the memory of more than 1 million civilians of all nationalities who found themselves behind barbed wire during the First World War. So this is not just commemorating the German ones, but all civilians of all nationalities. And the other points I'm making here, conditions. This is not about relativization of the Holocaust. That's the last bullet point here. But as I said earlier, it's about giving the broader historical context here. Um, I'll mention the other points as we go through the slides. So, Mark, if you could carry on, please. Yes. This is just to give you an impression. I just mentioned that Haig hosts the Internment Research Center. This is the Storps camp, which is just located outside Haig. It used to be a military training ground before the war, and after the outbreak of war was then made into that internment camp. Next one. And this is what it looks like today. There's one of the huts still there. All the other ones were taken apart after the war and used for building materials by the local farmers. So this is what it looks like at the moment, and is being kept as an archaeological site by Archaeology Scotland. Next one. I've got a range of slides fairly quickly now, so it's just to give you an idea of the project and to visualize this. So on the right-hand side, you see the cover image of one of the camp newspapers. It was called Stolpsjade, and the website you see there, that's from the Internment Research Center, where we actually digitized the Stopsiade. So this is for everyone accessible with translations. Next one. So it's the original on the right-hand side, digitized. Next one. With translation. So have a go after the presentation. It's lovely texts from captivity, but all censored, highly censored. So I've actually at one point been working with a literary specialist, a literature professor who knows how to read those texts. So to read between the lines and the fact that art can actually express things that go beyond the censor, stuff that the censor wouldn't have picked up, but the other internees would have picked up. Next one. This is just an image from the theater performances. As you can see at the very top, 2018. So what I'm telling you in terms of the chronology, the project was all in the wake of the centenary commemorations, but the activities are still going on. So we had the exhibition opening in 2018, and then theater performances going into 2019, and but the exhibition is still being shown in various locations. Next one. That's the exhibition catalog there. And that's Hoyt Museum, lovely Victorian museum, where that exhibition was shown for over a year. Next one. Place, that's an important one. So the exhibition is about the empire, which means that it could and can be shown in various Commonwealth locations and locations where internment actually took place. So what I did is adapt the content depending on place. So, for example, the top one here, that's in Hoyt Museum. Um, it's one of the glass cases which contains some of the artifacts produced by the internees in the camp. Woodwork was very popular, for example. On the left side of the top picture, you see, for example, a picture frame, a wooden picture frame produced by an internee in the camp, and various other written sources, a diary in the middle. So for visitors to get that sense of place, this is actually where it happened. At the bottom of the slide, the exhibition was shown in Saskatoon in Canada, and I was working with Bodan Kordan, who's written, as I mentioned earlier, on internment in Canada, worked with me on the exhibition, and he had a piece of one of the internment camps in Canada of a barbed wire. So the exhibit is of a barbed wire in a glass case, and the exhibition panels. Next one. Now, I hope this works. Mark, could you click at the bottom of the picture? Uh, yeah, so this is from KwaZulu-Natal Museum in Pietermaritzburg. Just the quick video to give you a sense of place as well. So here's an exhibition on African art and patterns, and then moving into the internment space here, so to speak. So colleagues from the museum complemented the internment panels with general World War One panels, World War One in South Africa. And then on the wall, you can see the internment panels. So this is a piece of both national history, national South African history, but then for visitors, really important to localize that experience and have those panels there. And then there was some specific information on the Fort Napier camp as well. Could you go to the next one? Um, then a lot of school children being guided through the museum. There's no sound there, but it doesn't matter. It's the one of the museum outreach officers and talking to school children about South African involvement in the First World War generally. Uh, and then go to the next one, Mark, and then those and quick video, those children engaging with the actual panels and asking some really good questions and me doing some workshops with them. Okay, this is just to give you an impression of what the exhibition looks like and that this is a theme that actually engages broader audiences. Next one. Okay, so on the back of that project, I did another um, uh, follow on for impact project, which is a wider one, generally about South Africa, World War One, and not just broader in terms of topic, but also in terms of formats. So this is a digital project. It's called South Africa, World War One, Digital and Virtual Experiences. When I showed my analog exhibition at a First World War conference, I was standing next to a company who produce virtual reality experiences on historical topics. It's a digital storytelling company that engages with academics like myself and collaborate with us on those virtual reality experiences. And we were then lucky to get another tranche of funding in order to produce those. So we produced one generally about South Africa and World War One, its engagement in various aspects there, but then got also funding to produce a second virtual reality experience on the internment camp in Fort Napier. The that generated another exhibition in KwaZulu-Natal Museum, which was launched in 2022. That's the bottom left picture there. Don't know whether you can read it. South Africa, World War One. It says on the big banner there. And the middle picture shows you some of the activities we did in schools in KwaZulu-Natal with the virtual reality headsets. And then we had a couple of other exhibitions. Now, with the added bonus of having a virtual ex reality experience. So visitors don't just see the analog panels, but they now can also actually be virtually in a camp. I don't know whether anyone's has done that before, virtual reality experience. It's quite a powerful way of communicating, not just doing gaming, but also communicating serious historical issues. Next one. Okay, I'll in the interest of time, I'll spare you some of the theoretical issues around virtual reality experience. The main thing here is maybe that they don't. The middle quote, VR cannot bring the past back to life as it really was. So we don't need to pretend that people can travel in time. We need to create a third space for visitors to engage with those historical issues. Next one. Um, the with this one again, I'm looking at the time now. Um, we'll leave this one. Mark, next one. The cross-sector collaboration that was really interesting and fruitful, but also challenging. So we were working together with the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, who were really enthusiastic about this. Um, and with KwaZulu-Natal Museum, Aston University, my university, and MBD, that's the name of the company who produced these VR experiences. Next one. Okay, so VR has then given me the opportunity to build some of the research frameworks into a visualized experience without viewers actually noticing that they experience that this is not just a film, but is engaging with those research frameworks. So the global phenomenon, for example, so it's not just a film about the Fort Napier camp, but it integrates that camp into those global contexts, conditions. Um, it's made clear in that film that those were relatively good. Then the issue of gender. Women were not interned, but they suffered as well. They were outside the camp, but the main breadwinner was gone. So there was quite a lot of suffering amongst women, and we communicate this in the film through a correspondence between an inmate, an internee, and his wife, who is outside the camp. So we went through lots and lots of letters, censored letters, and created a story line based on those letters, but condensed into a short correspondence between internee and wife. Um, then, in terms of continuities, that's something we discuss in detail in the book as well. On the right-hand side, and I don't know whether anyone knows what that is, right? The right-hand picture there, that's the Holocaust Memorial in Berlin. So the last scene of the film is actually set so viewers move through the Holocaust Memorial in order to show those continuities of internment. If you have 7.5 minutes after this lecture, go to the website. It's on the presentation and have a look at the film. You can watch it on screen as well. It's not the same experience, but you can watch it on screen. As you move around the mouse, you can look around the camp. Next one. Um, okay, so that was here are some images from the opening in KwaZulu-Natal Museum. Young people, but also older people with virtual reality headsets and really enjoying the experience, but also being emotionally um, moved in some cases in a different way from 2D representations or if they were just reading analog panels. Reactions, oh no, this is so sad. This is from questionnaires and also spontaneous reactions as they were watching those films. I felt I was there physically, everything felt so real. So again, quite a different experience. Next one. Here's an publication which I just published together with the creative director of the company, Paul Long, on immersive technology. So it goes a little bit beyond the theme of internment and could be interesting for other themes as well. So how do you produce these in an academically sound way, and what are the potentialities of that particular format? Our argument is here that of historical empathy. So virtual reality allows us to create empathy with people who might have lived 100 years ago. Next one. Okay, briefly, what next? So as I said, it's a live project. It's still going on. Barbados Museum have shown the exhibition in 2021. That was just the panels. And we've now engaged with them again, and we are going to show the same exhibition, but now with virtual reality experience and decolonized. So I've created now a 50-50 version. I've sort of decolonized myself, going with the flow of time, so to speak. So a version with far more information on Black internees, which I'll show on the. Oh, hang on, just say on this one, the dedication or the bit on the first panel here. You remember the one I read to you at the start of my presentation? Now, this exhibition is dedicated to the memory of more than 1 million civilians of all nationalities and color. So that's the addition to the decolonized version. If you go to the next panel. And here's just one example of the panel of the new panels. A new one, Caribbean internees in Germany. So there's information on those as well. Those obviously held British nationality, and those who were stranded in Germany, mostly seamen in Hamburg, Bremen, some of the ports of Germany. There's quite a lot of information there. That's one example. And the next one, Mark, that's the last one. So this one is about the virtual reality. It explains how it works. It will be shown in Barbados in 11th of November will be the launch in Barbados. And might be a little bit small to read, but it's also a kind of chronological outlook, positioning that First World War history into the broader history of internment camps. It lists a few instances, moving from the Holocaust, the Cambodian genocide, um, the um, the deportations of the Windrush scandal in Britain, for example, and I also mentioned Guantanamo Bay there. And in the light of the latest news coming out of the United States, this might take on a whole new life of its own. So it's a topic, it is historical, but it relates to current issues very much. And this is what viewers really appreciate as well. Okay, I think that's my presentation. Um, Looking forward to your questions and comments, please.
All right, great. Any questions? Feel free to unmute and ask.
I'll start with one. So I assume with this many people being concentrated together, there were some deaths that happened. So are those dead in military cemeteries? Are they in local cemeteries? How are the dead remembered? And
Yeah.
what association?
Okay. So the dead were buried locally, um, usually outside the camps, and the internees had some say in how that would happen. So they would do the ceremonies, and some would play some music. So there are actually photographs of burials just outside the camps. There's a story behind this as well, because the German War Graves Commission in the early 1960s decided to combine all those graveyards without informing local communities in Britain. So there is a German war cemetery in Britain, Cannock Chase, German war cemetery. I don't know whether that's known, but this is where all those were actually taken to. Um,
So even though they're civilians, they were taken there.
Yes, they were taken there.
Okay.
So if you go
Okay.
there, actually where I live, it's between Birmingham and Cannock Chase, so it's not too far away from me, and you can see those gravestones. And some of the names that I've got on my databases and that popped up in the sources I then saw on the gravestones. Yeah, but it's a bit of a conflation. Your question, it's probably what's military and what's civilian. It's that mixing of those two spheres which we've got in the First World War, which is actually yes expressed through how do we bury the dead. So there's that mixing
Okay.
things. Yeah.
Stefan, did they mix, like, say, Austro-Hungarians and Germans in the same camps, or did they keep different camps for the different Central Powers?
Yeah, it was the same camps. The ethnic activities were sometimes slightly different, but it was the same camps, and that could lead to problems and tensions between the camps. For example, um, the Czechs, on account of their Austrian nationality, were also interned. And there's a letter in the Foreign Office which we found of a Czech committee in London complaining about the fact that they are interned together with those Germans and Austrians, and there's a long history of Czech resistance to being in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So it's quite a sad story in some ways because some of those ethnicities really didn't need to be there. We've got the same in the Second World War internment camps with Jews who had fled the Nazis being interned with hardened, tough Nazis in some of the Second World War internment camps. Again, on the Isle of Man, um, but a different camp or different
Okay.
camp setting there. But those frictions existed in the camps.
You mentioned that at Stabb's military cemetery or military camp, there was one hut that's remaining.
Yeah.
Are there other things like on the Isle of Man? Are there things to see, or how much is left, or how many markers are there?
Yeah, so very little, and this really reflects the the memorialization vacuum there. Um, it's almost like the British government wanted to get rid of that history. So Nakelo was destroyed straight after the war, was made into it's today a kind of agricultural. It belongs to an agricultural college in a way. So you don't see anything apart from the road that took the prisoners from Peel, that's the harbor next to it, and there were rail went to the camp for prisoner transport. So you see a part of the street or the road leading up to it, but the camp itself you don't see anything. In Storps, one of the huts was, for example, taken into Hoyk, and there's now a children's nursery. They actually play in that hut. It looks like a First World War hut, and if you didn't know that history, you wouldn't know. You get a sense, okay, it looks slightly different and slightly odd, but so it was all kind of taken apart. Um, but apart from the physical aspects of what I just said, it's really the memorialization. There has been a huge hole in memorializing that historical chapter.
Thank you.
Mark, have you ever been on the Isle of Man? Have you visited or?
No, I haven't.
No, you haven't. Yeah, yeah. It's
No.
it's quite astounding because it was such a huge camp occupying a whole valley basically. 22,000. That's like a medium-sized town, but it's just totally erased from the not just the soil, but also memory.
Um, I have a question. I'm sorry I was joined late, so I may have missed this. I grew up in the western part of the United States, near the Canadian border, and through a podcast I heard a couple of years ago from the Vimy Foundation, they talked about internments of primarily Austrian Hungarians, most of whom were from the Czech region, who settled in that part of Canada and also in Montana, which is what my interest is because my family's from there. Can you talk about the internment at all in Canada? I'm sorry if I missed that part of your of your presentation. I apologize.
Yeah, I'm glad somebody else was late because I was late as well because of the time difference. So I don't think you've missed anything. When you say Czech, is it possibly that this is Ukrainian? Because that's more likely.
Well, my family is from what is now eastern end of Slovakia. So yes, it's entirely possible that that they're mixed with Ukrainian
Yeah.
people as well. Yeah.
Okay. So
But
that, yeah. So the reason why I'm asking um, the story of internment in Canada is mainly a story of Ukrainian internment. And this is slightly different to elsewhere in the empire. So those were mostly working class Ukrainians who were working in the steel industry and kind of urban industries in Canada before the war. Um, and were then interned on account of their Austro-Hungarian nationality. Um, those were treated much more badly than the German internees. It's quite a different story there, and kept in separate, mostly not all of them, but mostly kept in separate labor camps in the Canadian West, and a lot of the parks, the national parks in the Rocky Mountains, for example, were kind of built by heavy labor, mainly Ukrainians. Bohdan Kordan is writing about this in an excellent way. His publications are really excellent. So
I'm
we need
sorry,
to
would you say that
differentiate.
person's name again?
Bohdan Kordan. I don't think I can post anything. Mark,
Yeah,
can I? Don't.
I can.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, his name is the Kordan, exactly. Yeah. Bohdan, Bohdan is the first name. He's also quoted. Um, oh, who was asking? Is it John asking the question or?
Yes. Yeah, it was.
Yeah. If you want me to give you information on this, you're welcome to drop me an email. I can give you a few references and some information.
Yeah, I'll do that. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, no worries.
Thanks.
Yeah. Um, did I just answer the whole question? Was there something else to the question? Check. Um,
No, I mean, that was my question about,
okay.
what was going on.
Good.
Again, my family, and my understanding is that there were people, Austrian Hungarian people who were rounded up I know they were interned in the West, but I guess I also thought there were people like my family was working in the coal mines and farming in Montana. I presume they were doing that in Alberta and Saskatchewan, just over the border. Would have been rounded up as well. So that's what I was kind of curious about.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Okay.
there was some internment in the United States as well,
Yeah.
but not at as large scale as in the British Empire.
Right.
The ones in the United States, that was mainly pretty nationalistic Germans who were seen as a danger to the. I mean, the those same was the case with those in the British Empire, but they didn't really pose a danger. But those in America, some of them actually did. So they were kind of leading spokesmen of nationalist organizations. And the
Right.
two camps were Fort Douglas in Salt Lake City and the one in Georgia, Fort.
Oglethorpe or
Oglethorpe. Yeah,
McPherson.
thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So those were the two main camps. And the exhibition, by the way, was shown in Salt Lake City as well in the Fort Douglas Military Museum there
Nice.
a while ago.
Thank
I
you.
assume Stefan, that they differentiated some of the groups for like Poles and Ukrainians, where they were lived in different empires. I'm assuming they drew a distinction between a Pole that lived in German, Austro-Hungarian, and a Pole that lived in Russia.
Oh yes, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the Russian one wouldn't have been. I mean, the
Yeah.
Poles and the Ukrainians, this is all divided up anyway. Absolutely. Yeah, it depended on nationality. So the crucial bit was nationality.
Now, has there been similar work done on internment of civilians outside of the British Empire? Because I know, like they were interned in France, interned in Germany, in Austria-Hungary. Have there been similar studies done for historians in those countries?
Relatively little, actually. So some work has been done on Germany now. But the main point we are making, that's one of our arguments, which I wasn't able to mention all the arguments, but the one of ours is that it's the British who started it, so to speak.
Yeah.
So that's why I went on about the 5th of August. That's the day after the declaration. So it was all oven ready, so to speak, and then was introduced. And the German Empire was they were initially quite puzzled about the British activities there. So they didn't. Why are they interning our German countrymen abroad? What are they aiming to do? So it's only in retaliation from November, December 1914 onwards that the German Empire started to intern as well, in order to have that, as I mentioned, bargaining chip at hand as well, in order to make sure that the Germans were treated okay abroad. We better make sure that we intern some British as well, and those were interned in a former race course near Berlin, Ruhleben. That was the main camp for the British in Germany. Ruhleben is now, for those who've been to Berlin, it's one of the U-Bahn, the underground stations in the north of Berlin. So that was the main camp, and as a kind of memory space for the First World War, this is still sort of alive in Britain as well. So when Brits hear Ruhleben, oh yeah, this is where we were all interned. Other questions?
Okay.
Could I just ask whether anyone has ever done virtual reality? I realize there are not many questions around those things. It goes a little bit into the space of public history and how do you communicate things. But whether anyone's ever done, whether that's a thing in the United States, I had been in touch with the Kansas, with the First World War uh, museum in Kansas as well. They were really interested, but then it didn't go anywhere, the conversation. They really wanted to use the virtual reality as well, but then for, I don't know, some reasons, it didn't take off. And anyone
In
got any
in
experience with that? Yeah.
in 2023, so 2 years ago, I believe, they did the National World War One Museum did it together with I forget the name of the person, a well-known historian blogger on YouTube.
Okay.
They did a section to try to show what it was like to be in the trenches, and there was a brief period where you were in an observation balloon that was being shot at, etc. And they had that maybe for a year or a year and a half, the exhibit, and then I don't know, that's the only time they've done it that I'm aware of.
Okay, they might have. I was dealing with Lorna Vogt. I don't know whether she's known to the group. She's one of the curators. Had a meeting with her, and I think she might have mentioned that, and they wanted to pick up on this, but then they might have done other projects in
Yeah,
the.
maybe it was Dan Snow. I think that's the name of the person that they did
Oh
it with.
wow, yeah, that's a
Um,
big one.
yeah, and so they did that one, and to my knowledge, I don't remember them doing other ones as a follow-on.
Okay, interesting.
And there's also a comment in chat that they've done VR at Gettysburg.
Okay, Gettysburg. Yeah. Okay.
And I know Matt Switlick owns a French 75 millimeter gun, and they've videoed his gun in virtual reality to show a 75 millimeter gun, French 75 firing during World War One. But
Interesting.
I'm not sure. I think that was done with Shenandoah University here in Winchester, Virginia. But I'm not sure where you can see that or where it's what it's used for.
Hmm.
So I think virtual reality is still very small
It
here.
is. Yeah, it's a bit clumsy, as you will have seen from the headsets. You have to have those headsets. They cost around 350 pounds, which is $400 something per headset. So for working with large groups, it takes some money and some coordination to do that. So it'll probably develop in the next few years to make it more user friendly and even more immersive. Um, but yeah, hopefully that'll be the case. And it's just a good opportunity for us as historians to communicate about it. We're all getting not younger, let's put it like that. And the younger generation, they are just used to those digital formats more than we are. So this is just an attempt to find those formats to communicate things to the next generation.
And it certainly does help in that regard. I was doing a tour in 2019, and my son and his friend were there, and we were in Stavelo in the Bulge in the Ardennes. And
Uh-huh.
when they got out of their car, my son, his friends, my friend's son, my son's friend, he said, "We've been here. This is a battlefield." And one of the maps that they use in whatever the tank movie or tank is, World of Tanks or whatever, was based on Stavlo because they do that for the video games, and that's the way he knew that he had been in that town.
Amazing. Yeah.
So that ability to see it does play a big role in younger people's.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. The
Hmm.
issue with games very often is they are done for commercial purposes and they are not historically accurate. And that's the issue a lot of historians have with them. So, but we can't blame the games producers because we as historians don't engage enough with the producers. So
Yeah.
that was my way of, okay, I want to engage with people who actually produce this and who take me seriously as a historian and who don't primarily want to sell, but want to communicate that kind of historically accurate in that way. But it's I'm playing a small role here. The games industry is just so big, and in the end, young people will always flock to games. But I go a lot into schools and work in museums with young people, and they just love it. Um, in many instances, young people who would otherwise not engage with that particular historical period or with history at all, but they just find it cool. Okay, let's put this on, and then they see something which is produced in a serious way. So in a way, it's the technology that draws young people to those topics in the first place.
Yes.
Sorry, I don't want to talk
Cool.
about technology too much. If you've got any historical questions, because this is a historical society, obviously, please go ahead.
No, what I would love to do a VR of flying through the trenches to see what, because you see photos of it and all that, but actually to do a virtual reality tour of a trench, I think would really be immensely useful to my students and frankly fascinating.
Yeah, yeah.
I have a couple things I'd like to add. Am I coming through it all?
You
I
are.
hear you.
Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. Um, I've been aware of the internment problem in England for at least 10 years because it was not widely known, and I think the first person to say much about it was a guy at the University of London. However, I noticed in the presentation you just breezed over women,
Mhm.
and of course, in the in the Boer War, the British interned or put in a concentration camp mainly women and children who were packed in so closely that they began to die. And I should mention that a concentration camp is a Spanish invention, and um, it's just interesting that this has remained sort of buried for so long.
Mhm.
I'm glad to see it coming. I've used it in my own novels uh, more than once.
Mhm.
And I'm curious why there was such a short shift on the women.
Um,
Um,
yes, absolutely. I don't know where to start. There are quite a few pages and actually chapters and or sections in my book on women. The reason is because in the First World War it was main interned. So for historians, the usual tunnel vision is okay, main interned. Let's just write about men. But what actually happens to women, as I mentioned in the presentation as well, there was just equal suffering, and in some instances even more suffering. And this comes
yeah,
through in the sources as well. So in South Africa, for example, or in Barbados, no, was it Barbados?
Jamaica.
No, the one in Jamaica, yeah.
Mhm.
The men in turn, they're relatively well fed, but what about the women? They're actually starving. There was starvation of women outside the camps. In in South Africa, we've got sources of where men were, for example, transported from Durban to Pietermaritzburg to be interned. So they had lived in Durban, but the women actually went with the men and then camped outside the camp on
Mhm.
park benches, etc., but under rather distressing circumstances, um, and with the xenophobia in general society as well. Um, so yes, I do write about this, but it's a chapter that's long been buried. You're absolutely correct. There's the first comprehensive treatment is a PhD at the University of London by Zoe Dennis, which was I don't know whether it's been published in the meantime. So 2015, 16 PhD. So she writes about those gender issues, and they're really making their way into representations of internment. The second point you mentioned, absolutely, Spanish invention in Cuba,
Yeah.
General Weiler, who started things off in Cuba, but just picking up on other things as well, the barbed wire, for example, which, as you know, was invented in the American West in order
Yeah.
to contend cattle. So it's the kind of technology transfer and ideas of transfer. Well, if we can do it with cattle, we can do it with people as well. So it's that really longer trajectory of the idea of interning and how do we actually do it. So you're absolutely correct to point to these other aspects of that far wider story.
Okay.
Sorry, have I answered your
I would
question or
be
or
pleased to read some more about the women.
yeah, yeah. Well, as I said, in the virtual reality, there's a woman speaking as well. If you, I don't know whether you're interested. If you want to have a look at it, it's like a 7-minute film, and there's equal space to the women outside the camp. And I made a point of this. I don't just want male voices, but I want a female voice as well, reading a letter she's writing to her husband in
She'll
the camp.
take a look at your book then.
Uh,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Mm.
Let me know whether there's enough on women in there. But well, it's
Well,
there is the problems of the silence of the sources, obviously. That's the usual thing. Again, historians tunnel vision. We tend to read the sources we have, but we don't look at the sources we don't have. And ethnic minorities, women, working class, those who are not illiterate, those who can't write, those who are illiterate, those usually don't appear in the sources. We just have to find different ways of telling those
yes, yeah, that is
stories.
a big problem. But you were also correct when you said that this has application to the situation today, which it does. I mean,
Yeah,
deportation, and
absolutely. Yeah.
camps, so forth and so on. So in some ways, it's like a corrective to the perception, gosh, this has never happened before. But of course it has.
Yeah, and it's a bit of a warning story as well, what can happen if you're not
Yeah,
careful.
that's right.
I don't want to get too political because with the news we are getting from the States, we these days I better be careful.
Mhm.
But well, you know
Well,
what I might say.
we do our best, but
Yeah,
sometimes it ain't enough,
yeah,
Yeah.
of course. Okay, well, thanks for your presentation. I wasn't aware that it went all the way down to New Zealand, but quite a stretch.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm. Well, thanks very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Stefan. That was great. So, and I apologize I didn't get back to you sooner with the time change. Um,
Yeah, I had written to Mark earlier today. Please, could you triple check I got the time right?
yeah,
But then we don't always check emails. But so apologies again for coming in late. It's
that's
just one
okay.
of those
I just
transatlantic.
assumed that I didn't even think about we would have different times of switching to daylight savings time, but Randy said, well,
Okay.
Yeah.
they switched to summertime after we do it. Uh-oh.
Yeah, I think England and Germany, I think they switch at the end of the month.
Yes, yeah, yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
And
Yeah.
we switched a week or two ago.
Okay, there we go. It's one of those things. Yeah, I might mention if anyone's got a question on any of the aspects, uh, again, drop me an email. I'll be happy to engage in one-to-one conversations or
Okay.
correspondence.
Mhm.
Mark, will the presentation be circulated or?
Yeah, we have a YouTube channel and it will be on the YouTube channel.
Okay, and the slides as well because they some of them
If
some
you're
linked, so
willing,
you're welcome
yes.
to circulate the slides as well.
Okay, I can do that. Yeah, I wanted to ask first before I did that. So,
Yeah.
and I can put your email address in the chat here. So there we go.
Oh, terrific.
Oh, I'm only just reading the chat here. Uh, okay, thank you for thanking me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, yeah, and for the members, I am, as I mentioned, trying to bring in more scholars from outside the U.S. as well. Not always. Our next talk in 3 months is actually local to me. A professor from George Mason. Kevin Matthews is an expert on Irish history and will be talking about the Easter Uprising in World War One. I realized after I had scheduled everything, I probably, given the calendar, should have scheduled Easter Rising for now and asked Kevin to come in and ask Kevin for the summer. But oops, I missed the clock. I could have had an Easter one at Easter. And I've been talking with a young Chinese scholar that I saw present at the American Historical Association in January, whose dissertation is on a diary of one of the Chinese workers from the Chinese Labor Corps on the Western Front, which is really interesting. And I was going to mention it to my friends in the World War One, the aviation historians group, because among the tasks they did, they were the ones who were shipping the fuel to the airfields. So it wasn't just digging trenches. And they often were working not just the Chinese, but were working with other laborers, including, if I remember correctly, POWs, and doing some of the dirty work behind the scenes. But I'm working with her to schedule that for later in the year when her schedule opens up. But thank you very much, Stefan. This was great. Like I said, I'm enjoying his book, and I really liked hearing. I wasn't aware before I started reading your work about how extensive internment was. I knew there was some, but I had no idea how extensive. especially throughout the British Empire. I just had not thought about it. So I appreciate it. This was really interesting. I will let you know when it's up on our YouTube channel. And our group will meet again in mid-June. Again, the normal time, Saturday afternoon. So thank you very much, Stefan. That was great. And thank you all for attending today.
Yeah, thanks very much again. Great pleasure. And thanks for your questions. Really interesting aspects there as well.
Thank
Thanks.
you.